a quick video with 5 tips for how to read Homer's Odyssey. I first tried to read the poem in high school, tried again in college, disaster both times. But I really enjoyed the poem in adulthood. And I think it's because I changed these 5 things. So first, don't judge the characters. You're going to be shocked at how unlikable some of these characters are. You're going to see how Telemachus speaks to his mother, and how Odysseus speaks to his father, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. The first line of the poem tells you that Odysseus is a man of twists and turns. He's constantly scheming, and so is his son, and so is his wife, and so is the goddess Athena. And there will be times when you just want them to be direct and truthful and polite. And whenever I found myself wanting to scream at the character, that was when I tried to ask myself why they're doing this thing. You can judge the characters after you finish the poem, but while you're reading, you should just try and understand them. Keep asking yourself, why is the character doing this twisted or unlikable thing? Next is to annotate what's happening on each page. The annotation can be very simple. Agamemnon is warning Odysseus. But I try and do this on each page. Sometimes I do it for each paragraph, because it helps me to follow the story, and it makes it so much easier to review the notes at the end. I think of this as who is doing what to whom. Next tip is to slow down. I read Homer at less than half my normal reading speed. The Iliad and the Odyssey are 2 of the most important books ever written, so I tell myself it's worth my time to understand them. You know what happens in the Odyssey. He's lost, and then he goes home. So you don't need to race through and see what happens. The ancient Greeks who heard these poems recited aloud also knew these stories. They knew them from birth, but they turned up anyways because they wanted to hear the details of the poem. The imagery that Homer uses, the emotion that some of these speeches evoke, that's what makes the poem. And I think the poet built in this layer of depth to be able to entertain an audience that would hear the same poem year after year from birth until death. That richness is there for us, but we have to slow down. So in my own readings, I try and sit with each of the poem's 24 books for at least a day before I move on to the next one. And I try and notice the sections of the poem as I move through. I think you can cut the poem in many different ways, but broadly I think of the first 4 books as one section. This is Odysseus' son Telemachus' journey. Books 5 through 8 are Odysseus' journey to Scheria. Books 9 through 12 are called the Apology. This is Odysseus giving his first-hand account of some of the supernatural encounters on his travels. And books 13 through 24 are his homecoming to Ithaca. Again, I think you can cut the poem in many other ways, but you should dwell on these sections as you read. And you should feel the difference in language and in character as you move from one section to the next. The next tip's related, a bit controversial. I think you should look up most of the things you don't understand in the poem. For me, that was the pronunciation of names, new vocabulary, and other myths. On pronunciation, I want to know that it's pronounced Telemachus and not Telemachus. And I want to know that it's Menelaus and not Menelaus. If I'm going to read these names over and over again in the poem, I want to be sub-vocalizing them to myself correctly. There's a great pronunciation glossary in the back of the Fagles version that made this convenient for me, but I know many of the other translations have a similar glossary too. Same thing with the vocabulary. There are strange words in Homeric Greek that require strange English words to match in translation. I had never heard the word din before, but it's probably used 100 times in the Fagles translation of the Iliad. I'm happy I looked it up. You don't want to bog yourself down when you read, but the language of the poem repeats. So if you see something you don't understand, there's a good chance you're going to see it again. So it's probably worth your time to look it up. And when I do look it up, I circle it and I draw a line to the margin and I write the pronunciation or the definition of the word. So when I review my notes or when I reread the book in the future, the information I need is right there on the side for me. Again, I try not to bog myself down, so I use a 2 times rule. If I notice a name or a new vocab word, for the second time, I look it up. The last thing I look up is the other myths, and I think this is an area where you can go as deep as you want. Homer's audience knew all the myths, so he doesn't always explain them in the poem. I think very few of these myths are essential to understand the poem. The Odyssey, I find, relies less on other myths than the Iliad. So this is an area where you can follow your interests. If you're just going to look up one, though, I'd recommend that you read the succession myth in the Theogony. The Theogony is a very short ancient Greek poem that gives the genealogy of the gods. I think it's very helpful to understand who the different gods are, what their relationships are to one another, and what their cosmic domains are, so that Zeus rules the skies and Poseidon rules the seas and so on. I made a video about the Theogony on my channel. The next tip is to invest the time to find the right translation for you. If you're really studying this poem, you're going to spend dozens of hours with it. Invest 30 minutes to find a translation that works for you. I think the Wilson translation is probably the easiest read. I like the Fagles translation. There is no best translation. I think there's just a translation that's going to get you to read the poem. And this was one of the issues I had when I was in school. I was assigned a translation that I had to read from and quote from, but I couldn't understand it. And I wish I had bought a different translation that I did understand, because then I could have used that other translation as a reference to get me unstuck in places. All right, happy reading. Subscribe to the channel, because I'm posting a 3-hour video guide to the Odyssey later this month.